Hello, dear friends. Welcome to Spirit Reports of Life After Life. We're meeting every Sunday evening at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. What we're focusing on is the book by Allan Kardec called Heaven and Hell. In the second half, we find many cases of spirits that have transitioned, and they were so kind as to avail themselves and report back to us the experience that they encountered in the afterlife. And we usually hear a little bit about their lives on earth and then their experiences on the other side. We will be studying many different cases in different categories. Last week we started off with chapter 1, and then we proceeded to another chapter about the difference of mediumship. So at the beginning we talked about last week, just to summarize it quickly for those of you who may not remember or who weren't here last time. We have three options, main options, to look at what happens after life on this planet. And one large group on this planet believes that there is nothing. We so-called die, and that's the end of it. We get one shot and that's it. And we label that nihilism. And the other possibility or option of people in their belief systems is that we are part of a whole, like a drop of water. And that is our lives. And then at the end of our lives, our life goes back into the whole. And it's the so-called absorption theory. And the last one is Spiritism, where we know that we have a soul, and that soul will continue to be alive after our physical form falls off. And at the same time, our soul retains its individuality. And not only its individuality, but also all the lessons that it has learned through all the many lifetimes it has lived. Then we proceeded. This is for those of you who are just coming in. We're just quickly summarizing what we talked about last week. Then we went to another chapter and we looked at why Moses prohibited mediumship. And the reasons in a nutshell are, during Moses' time, his people used mediumship for fortune telling. They didn't use any reverence, no piety. They charged for it, so there was heavy commerce attached to it. There was sorcery, and lastly also sacrifice of human lives. And that was strictly prohibited, with death actually during Moses' days. And now we're asking, why does Spiritism support mediumship? It is actually anchored in mediumship. Well, the answer is because when we practice mediumship in accordance with Spiritism, we do none of what people during Moses' time did. But on the contrary, we use mediumship for the good. We use it to educate ourselves and others. We use it to transmit consoling messages. We use it to help incarnates as well as discarnate spirits. And we use it for our own self-transformation. And of course those of others. So there is reverence, there is piety involved. We learn through the guide and model Jesus Christ, and we do not charge. The whole of mediumship in Spiritism is really linked, or could be seen as a charitable act, most and foremost. So before we begin today's talk, let me look at some friends who have come in. I see there is Tony. Hello, welcome. Welcome, Tony. There is Karina Lisi. Welcome, Karina. So nice to see you or know that you're here. Teresa, welcome, Teresa. Wonderful. Rainbow, so nice to have you. Nora Brazil, welcome, welcome. There's Vanessa. Thank you so much, Vanessa. We really thank Kardec Radio for this beautiful opportunity of congregating here in our various international classrooms, where we nourish our souls, where we learn repeatedly new things, which is so wonderful. And we can do it in the privacy of our homes. Isn't that wonderful? Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Vanessa, and all the good spirits for Kardec Radio. And then we have, Nora Brazil. I said already hi, Tony, Renata, Casade. Welcome to you as well, Renata. There is Agle Wolber. Welcome, welcome. And so Teresa is saying it's going in and out again. Anyone else having this? So please let me know, because I'm not on, this time I'm not on Wi-Fi, I'm on data, and it should be fine. But if you have a problem, please do let me know. All right. So I just want to circle back to chapter 1, which is how Allan Kardec starts the book Heaven and Hell. He says, we live, we think, we act. That is certain. And we die. That is no less certain. Now the question is, where do we go and what do we experience? So he establishes a commonology among us all. That is how he starts Heaven and Hell. We are now going to jump to chapter 1 of part 2 of Heaven and Hell, which you will find, for those of you who have the book and would like to follow along, that chapter 1 is on page 219 in Heaven and Hell, page 219, and the chapter is called The Passage. Now, you may be wondering, what passage are we talking about? Unless it is very obvious, because we are talking about the passage from this earthly life to our life in the spirit world. And what we're going to look at today is, how does this happen? Are we feeling any pain? What is going on the other side? And how is this whole transition? We're doing that because once we know how the transition happens, we will better understand the spirit cases, which we will be starting to study next week. Because then we have the theoretical baseline. We know already what is going on. The other reason why this is important is because it will help us with our own transition. Because we know we've been, by the good spirits, we've been told it is and will be helpful to us to acquaint ourselves with the transition, to prepare ourselves every day to think about our own transition, which will make it easier at the end. Because as Allan Kardec says in the first sentence of Heaven and Hell, we will all have to go through this. So we might as well be prepared. And the earlier we can start with it, hopefully the easier it will be when our time comes. So let us see what Allan Kardec teaches us. So he's saying that we all will go through this passage, but many of us feel rather apprehensive about it. So why is that? He says, there are many people who do not fear death per se, but what they do dread is the moment of transition. During that passage, do we suffer or not? I've often heard people say, oh, you know what, once I'm dead, that's fine. I'm dead. We know that we are never dead because our soul continues living, but we know that people mean their bodies fall off. But I'm scared of the actual dying process because I don't want to suffer. I want it to go fast, right? So maybe we're part of that belief. We want it to go fast, this transition. Here we will learn how we can help our transition to be faster and easier, because there is a way. So let's see. So he's saying that most of us are apprehensive because we're wondering whether we're going to suffer. So when we look at science and religion, Allan Kardec tells us there is no answer. But why does neither science nor religion, say anything about this transition? Well, let us see. He continues on to say that they both lack an understanding of the laws that govern the relationship between the spirit and matter. So both science as well as religion lack an understanding of how these laws that govern our relationship between the spirit and matter actually happen. So religion stops at the threshold of the spirit life, as we can imagine, and science stops at the threshold of the material life, right? Science does not continue looking past matter, and religion often doesn't go beyond the spirit life. It doesn't look into matter. That's what the dichotomy we have on planet Earth, right? So Spiritism, however, helps us here, because Spiritism is the intersecting point of the union between both. So where life on Earth and life, the spirit life, intersect, that's where Spiritism helps us. And we will see how. Only Spiritism can tell us how this transition occurs. The transition from our earthly life to our spirit life. And why can Spiritism help us with that? Well, because Spiritism has the capacity, due to the knowledge from the good spirits, that what actually the soul is, what the nature of our soul is. So when we go to the Spirit's Book, question 76, the Spirit's Book by Allan Kardec, Allan Kardec asks, what is a spirit? Now, to back up a little bit, he's saying, Sunshine, you're using soul and spirit. What are you talking about? This is really confusing. Well, what we also learn in the Spirit's Book is that a spirit is called spirit as long as it isn't incarnated, doesn't have a physical body that we have. But once the spirit is in a physical body, it's called a soul. Bottom line, however, is spirit and soul are the same things. Allan Kardec apparently only used two different terms to be more exact and precise. So let's back up. So here is the answer, right? Spiritism has the capacity to tell us what the nature of the soul is, i.e. spirit. And what is a spirit - soul? It is the intelligent principle of the universe. So that we know now. So the spirit is a very, very fine matter. It's very translucent. So there is no, I can't even say it's matter. This was probably not the right word. But spirit is a very, we can't see it with our eyes, right? Further on, Spiritism teaches us, gives us information about the life after death, after our discarnation. Because due to mediumship, we can actually communicate to spirits on the other side, which will help us and does help us with how this transition happens from life on this planet to life in the spirit world. And lastly, Spiritism has an understanding of the fluidic tie that binds the soul to the body. And that is the key. There is a threefoldness to us. We have a soul that continues on living. We have a body that falls off, is very transitory, transitional. And to bring our physical form and the soul together, we have a perispirit, which is the link between our soul and our body. So we all know that inert matter doesn't have any sensations, right? We touch the table, doesn't feel anything. We touch the computer, doesn't feel anything. So our bodies are without the soul. Our bodies is inert matter. So who do you think, or what do you think actually experiences sensations of pain and pleasure? Which part of us experiences pain and pleasure? Well, the answer is it is the soul. Maybe that's very surprising to hear, correct? It is the soul that suffers and not the body. And you're going to say, how can that be? Because when I pinch myself, it hurts, right? So let's see how that can be. Allan Kardec says, the body per se is nothing more than an instrument of pain. Aha! So our body is an instrument of pain. The soul is what actually feels it. So when I pinch myself, yes, it does hurt. But the pain is really, in the body, just an instrument of the soul, which will become really important when we will talk about the transition and pain during the transition from this life to life after life. All right, so now we learned another piece, namely that the soul is the one that suffers and not the body. When separated from the soul at death, the body can be mutilated at will and will feel nothing. And I think we knew that, correct? Because our body without the soul is nothing. Just a heap of flesh and bones. Can't feel, can't say anything, can't move, nothing. It becomes inert matter, right? So, now how does this mechanism actually work? I'm still on page 220 of Heaven and Hell, if you want to follow along. Let me see, is there anyone else? Does anyone else have any issues with the transmission? Please do tell me, and if it's okay, then you don't have to say anything. Soul, welcome soul. Nice seeing you. Welcome, welcome. So the perispirit, as we know, is the fluidic envelope of the soul. It is the tie between our physical body and our soul. The perispirit is the fluidic envelope of the soul and is not separate from the soul either, before death or afterwards. So in other words, our perispirit and soul form, I want to say, unity. And it is that unity of soul and perispirit that travels from lifetime to lifetime. Our soul and perispirit incarnates into a body, lives this life, excarnates, the body falls off, the soul and the perispirit go into the life after life, and eventually the soul, our soul and perispirit, it's then called spirit actually, will go back into another body. So that's a unit. The two together, namely the soul and the perispirit. Teresa says, okay now to leave and come back in. I don't understand, Teresa. If you wanted to, if that's a question, please let me know, because I'm happy to see that I can answer it. All right? Thank you. So the two together, namely the soul and the perispirit, may be said to form a whole. During earthly life, the perispiritual fluid penetrates the body at every point and serves as a vehicle for the physical sensations of the soul. The perispirit is linked to the physical body molecule by molecule. And it serves as the vehicle for the physical sensations of the soul. So the perispiritual fluid is the transition. So it goes from the body, the soul feels the pain, the transition point is the perispiritual fluid, and then into the body. You see? So there's these three steps, these three parts to us. The soul operates through the perispirit to act upon the body and guides its movements. So our souls decides, and that's through the body, and we through the mind. We know that above the mind is the will. We learned that in Thought is Life by Emmanuel, that above the mind is the will, because the will really governs. It's the CEO of us. The will governs our mind and decides. We know that from our lives. If our willpower is strong, then we do the good, and if it's not so strong, we may not do so good. So through the will and the mind, the soul decides to do something operates the perispirit, and that acts upon the body and guides the movement. If there's any questions, please let me know, right? So then what happens at the transition? It is the extinction of organic life that produces the separation of the soul from the body by breaking the fluidic connection that links them together. So some of us may have thought, oh, it's my soul that decides to leave. But it really comes from the body. It's the extinction of organic life that produces the separation. So when our life force becomes so weak and the organs won't work anymore, and we see that so easily in old age, correct? That's when the soul wants to break free from the body. And it does that by breaking the fluidic connection that links them together. And the fluidic connection is this perispirit that, remember, is the link molecule by molecule. The perispirit is linked to the physical form. And this process, according to Allan Kardec, naturally does not occur abruptly. But we will learn later that there will be some cases, and I'm just going to say it, we'll go back into that, like for example suicide or an accident, where that rupture can happen abruptly. And we will see what that leads to. So the perispiritual fluid then disengages little by little from all the organs so that the separation is complete at the end. So that is really what happens in a naturally caused death or transition due to old age. The connection becomes weaker and weaker. The old person's organs become weaker and weaker. We all know that. We've probably seen it. So when we go to the Spirit's book, question 155, I'm not going to go into the question, but there is some small print. And I thought it would be interesting to hear what the illuminated spirits said about transition, namely death there. They say death is the destruction of the body, but not of the perispiritual envelope. So only the body gets destroyed. The envelope, the perispiritual envelope, as we know it, will continue to travel on to the next life together with our soul. So again, death is the destruction of the body, but not of the perispiritual envelope, which separates from the body when organic life ceases, right? So that is important to, now we know that we can't say any longer, oh, my soul wants to leave. No, it's really the breakdown of the physical form that initiates that leaving under normal circumstances. Now, there is exceptions, of course, and we will look into that in a minute. So now, let's look at the pain. Remember, we started off saying, so is this transition painful, and why could it be painful, and when is it not painful? All right, so the painful sensation that the soul experiences, remember the soul is the one that feels the pain, at that moment of transition results directly from the number of points of contact between the body and perispirit. And this in turn determines the greater or lesser difficulty or slowness of the separation. So what is Allan Kardec teaching us here? He is saying that we will experience more pain the more contact points still exist between our body and our perispiritual fluid, our perispirit. The more points of contact there still are at the point of transition, the more painful our transition will be. And that is the pain of the soul, that the soul experiences. And this in turn determines, he continues on to say, the greater or lesser difficulty or slowness of the separation. It is needless to point out that whether death is more painful or less so depends on the circumstances, of course. and then we will look at the circumstances. So for now, we know that there is our soul, our immortal part, there's our physical form, and in between we have the perispirit as the blink. The soul and the perispirit are unity that will travel from life to life, and at the point of transition from life on this plane to life in the other plane, in the spirit life, the link, the perispiritual link to our physical form will molecule by molecule disintegrate. And when our moment comes where we take our last breath and there is still a lot of points, or right before that point of our last breath, there's still a lot of points of contact, and it lingers on and takes a long time, that's when it will become more painful for the soul. Now, next we will look at, in a minute, we will look at how we can influence that process, potentially, all right? But first we will look now at the different circumstances that Allan Kardec refers to. So there is one, if at the time of the extinction of organic life, so at the time when our body is getting weak and old, the disengagement of the perispirit has already been completed, the soul will feel absolutely nothing. New information. So when our point of transition arrives and we've so-called done the work of disengaging our perispirit from our physical form, there won't be any pain. That is something we wish for, correct? And we will see how we can help that. There is a message. There is Hola, soy Luis Dominguez da Web Radio Portal da Luz de Dorados. You guys are probably gonna just raise your eyebrows, but I don't speak Portuguese, and I'm sorry, this probably didn't sound very good. But welcome, Luis. I'm very happy you are here. And yes, and if there's something in English, then I can respond to you. Thank you so much. Yes, so that God is perfect, isn't it? It's just, we're so grateful for having all this information and how this is all organized, and that Spiritism, through the good spirits and Allan Kardec, avail ourselves to this amazing information that helps us so much if we open up and want to study and understand, right? Yes. So the second case is, if at the time of transition, the union of the two elements, namely the body and the perispirit, is still in full force. So if the perispirit and the body are still strongly linked, a sort of rupture will occur that impacts very painfully on the soul. So when at that point of transition, all the contact, or a lot of the contact points between the body and the perispirit are still intact, that's when we feel pain. The next one is, if the union between body and perispirit is weak, the separation will be easy and occur without shock. If after the complete, now I'm transitioning to page 222 in case you're interested. If after the complete cessation of organic life, there are still several points of contact between the body and the perispirit, the soul will feel the effects of the body's decomposition until the tie is completely dissolved. That is in cases of accidents and suicides, when it happens quickly. And I seem to remember there was also a case in one of the books, spiritist books I read, on the canvas of the infinite, I want to say, where somebody was so linked into their matter, into their wealth that they left behind, that they couldn't really release themselves from the body because they were actually really clinging to their castle and to their belongings. So they actually felt the pain of their bodies decomposing, and it was very, very, very painful to them. They just couldn't let go. So based on these facts, Allan Kardec continues to say, the suffering that accompanies death will depend on the adhering force that binds the body to the perispirit. So the stronger the connection still is at the time of our transition, the more pain we will feel. everything that might help to weaken this force, this connection between the body and the perispirit, accelerates the speed of the disengagement process, making the passage less difficult. So everything that might help to weaken this force. We'll look into that a little bit in a minute. We'll take it one step at a time. So let us see. In the Spirit's book, Part 2, Chapter 3, page 157, there is a chapter called The Separation of the Soul from the Body. So that would be probably a good idea for us to look at, maybe after this gathering, to get more information, because Allan Kardec has a whole chapter dedicated just to the separation of the soul from the body. You will find it again in the Spirit's book, Part 2, Chapter 3, page 157. A little bit more information. So, we've talked about the link between the perispirit and the physical form, and now we know that when this link is still strong, at the time of our transition, we will experience more pain. Now, there is another factor. In the transition from the corporeal life to the spirit life, there is another crucially important phenomena that occurs, and that is the state of confusion. Now you can say, now what is that? Now it's getting even more complicated, right? But it's really not that complicated. We're going to break it down. So the state of confusion is so-called numbness that temporarily paralyzes our faculties, potentially. And it happens after our transition. So what we've talked about so far happens before our transition. The numbness happens after our transition. So that's really where we draw the line. And that's what makes it easier when we can compartmentalize it, right? So the state of confusion. The soul is almost never consciously aware of the last sigh of death, Allan Kardec tells us. Almost never. And the state of confusion at the time of death, after death, can thus be regarded as normal, because most of us are not prepared really, mentally and emotionally and spiritually, for this transition to happen. And which is something we're doing right now, right? We're starting to prepare ourselves by educating ourselves. So the person who is transitioning may already be in a state of confusion, which will not help afterwards. The confusion will continue. And this confusion can last, according to Allan Kardec, from sometimes only a few hours to years. We've had in our rescue work, spirits come in. They've been in a state of confusion for over 100 years. And it resulted from them not being able to let go of the material life they had on earth. Let me see, there's something coming through. Oh, Luis Dominguez says, please contact us at Radio Portal da Luz. All right, Luis. Thank you so much. Will do. Thank you. So, this state of confusion when we come out of it, can be compared to awakening from a deep sleep. The thoughts are confused. There's vague and uncertain sensations. It's like a fog. And I think we can relate to that, because I'm sure we've had moments where we wake up in the morning where we feel like that. So that's what the state of confusion, when we come out of it, we can kind of compare to. Again, it would be maybe helpful to go to the Spirit's book, Part 2, Chapter 3, which deals with the Spirit's state of confusion after death. Again, a whole chapter dedicated to the Spirit's confusion after death. It's on page 161 in the Spirit's book, if you're interested. So, in other words, the last sigh of death is not therefore the most painful moment necessarily, because the soul is not usually even aware of it, Allan Kardec tells us. However, the soul can suffer before that moment from the disaggregation of the body's matter during the death throes, he says, and afterwards from the anxiety of the state of confusion. So there are some cases where there is no pain. It goes easy. Prepared, the link, the paraspiritual link to the body is already severed, and we transition peacefully and without pain. Now there is cases when we have pain when the link is still strong. And then afterwards, apparently, it is even more painful when we are in this state of confusion because it causes anxiety. So, interesting to know. So, the state of confusion is a direct result. Now we're learning more. The state of confusion is a direct result of the affinity between the body and the perispirit. Same cause that we experienced in the state, our disaggregation, disintegration of our connection between the body and the perispirit before our quote-unquote death. It's also based on the affinity we have to the body and our material life. The same happens with the state of confusion that's linked to that phenomena as well. So both are linked to the same, which I think makes it easier because maybe we can have one remedy for both. Wouldn't that be good? We'll see. So the state of confusion is a direct result of the affinity between the body and the perispirit. The greater the affinity, the more difficult and prolonged will be the soul's efforts to disengage itself. Makes sense, right? And then, what does the strength of affinity depend on? You're going to ask, correct? You're going to say, so why? Why are some people have this affinity so strongly than others, and how can we remedy it, right? You want to know, I want to know too. So let's see. We're learning now that the principal cause behind the greater or lesser difficulty of the disengagement, both before we die, the so-called death, as well as afterwards in the state of confusion, is, guess what it is? What's the principal cause? The soul's moral state. So it depends on our inner transformational work that we've done during our lifetime. Wow, here is a major clue, right? Now we know, or some of us already, the light goes on and said, oh, okay, thank you, Allan Kardec and the good spirits, illuminated spirits, you gave us the key. Essentially gave us the key, and now all we have to do is use it day by day, day in and day out, right? So, the principal cause behind the greater or lesser difficulty of the disengagement, namely the body, the perispirit disengaging from our physical form, is our soul's moral state. The affinity between the body and the perispirit is proportional to the attachment between the spirit and matter, which is most pronounced in individuals whose preoccupations exclusively and solely involve the material world and the material pleasures that life offers. So, our soul's moral state, if we focus primarily on material life, earning money, amassing money, having a pleasurable life, we all know how that looks like because this is what's being teased. We're being teased with every single day, right? The illusion of all of this. But the more we focus on that, our moral state is not that elevated. And consequently, our ties between our physical body and our perispirit will be very strong, which will impact our transition from this life to the life after life, and will also have an impact on our life after life because we may be in a state of confusion for more or less longer period of time. Very interesting, right? So we're learning a lot. Thank you, Allan Kardec. So he continues to say I'm on page 224. And since the slowness and difficulty of disengagement are a result of the soul's degree of purity and dematerialization, it depends on us to render the disengagement easy or difficult, pleasant or painful. Wow. To me, that's good news. Because I feel there's something I can do. I can actually work on my moral transformation, on my inner transformation, which will help me not only in this lifetime, as we know, to do the good, to be more charitable, more benevolent, indulgent, to be a kinder, more loving person. It does not only help me now, I'm learning in this life, but it will also help me. It's the same key that will help me to unlock the door of my transition from this life to the life after life. And furthermore, it will help me to hopefully not linger too long in a state of confusion. And perhaps I can even avoid it altogether. Isn't that good news, friends? I think that is tremendous news. I know I'm holding the key. It's in my responsibility. So now, let's take a deep breath because this is something to celebrate. You know how on Facebook when you write congratulations and the balloons go off? That's a balloon moment. Let us enjoy that. Let's take a deep breath. And exhale. We've learned a lot already. A lot of information. But it all comes down to one thing. Bottom line is, if we work on our inner transformation, we cannot go wrong. We're helping ourselves and others. And lastly, we even help this whole planet to take its next step in its evolution. So now we're on page 224, item 9, and we're now going to look at different cases of transition. So in the so-called natural death, Allan Kardec goes on to say, which is mainly old age or disease, the disengagement from the perispirit, the perispirit from the physical form, from the body, occurs over the time prior to death. So it's a longer process, slowly. So for individuals whose soul has become dematerialized and whose thoughts have been detached from earthly matters, now that's really important, that our thoughts have detached itself from our belongings, from earthly matter, our homes, our money, all the attachment, family, human connections, the dog, the cat, the bird, the fish. You know what I'm talking about, right? So when our thoughts have been detached from earthly matters, the disengagement is nearly complete before actual quote-unquote death. In that case, it is like peaceful sleep. There is not much pain for the soul, and there's almost no state of confusion after, during the transition, and particularly after the transition on the other side. The soul awakens on the other side with an indescribable feeling of hope and blessedness. That's a beautiful picture I would like to strive for. And we know we have the key now. It's in us. We have the key to success, our inner transformation. However, he says, in materialistic and sensual individuals, who have lived more according to the body than the spirit, and for whom the spirit life has meant nothing. Often atheists, right? Atheists. The material ties are tightened. Their transition, or quote-unquote death, is a struggle for the spirit. So if we have lived a very material life, we do not know about spiritism, or even if we do, and we still focus on just matter, that's when our transition will be potentially long, arduous, and painful. The more the spirit clings to corporeal life, the less it sees beyond it. Makes sense, right? The state of confusion actually began well before actual death. And that we can attest to as well, right? For a material spirit who is just focused on matter, the transition period starts. There's very often already a state of confusion. Of course, it doesn't help if the death is like cancer and then drugs are being administered. That's deaths I have been privy to. Lots of confusion by the spirit that's still attached to, by the soul that's still attached to its physical form. But I do care for the elderly, so I have been allowed, I've been gifted with the opportunity to assist with transitions. And yes, there is a lot of confusion beforehand that I am personally experienced with the souls that I've worked for. And I can attest that most of them do not recognize that there is a spirit, that there is a God, that there's life after life. So death has come, but nothing ends. The confusion continues. So they experience confusion already before the transition. There is pain because it's a longer transition of decomposition of the link from body to perispirit, from perispirit to body, and then the confusion just continues on the other side. And that confusion manifests by the spirit thinking it's still alive, but does not know that this life is a spiritual life and not a physical life anymore. We see that very clearly in the book by Andrea Luiz through Chico Xavier, Life and Life Goes On, because both the two protagonists did not really prepare themselves for their transition. They both died of an illness, probably cancer. Not too old. They died after surgery. And they're completely confused afterwards, and they're convinced that they're still on Earth. Very interesting book. Teaches us a lot about this transition as well, and this whole process of confusion and then coming out of it. It was very painful for them. So then we also have a case of violent deaths. Now, violent deaths would be, for example, an accident or suicide. So, accident or a murder, right? So that would be, boom, 1 minute alive, another minute transitioned. There is no partial disaggregation happening before the transition, obviously. So the body and the perispirit are still strongly linked. So the detachment of the perispirit in this case only begins after death. And Allan Kardec says that this type of transition is one of the most interesting subjects for study because it presents a very peculiar situation of a spirit who mistakes its fluidic body as being its physical one, and it experiences all the sensations of organic life. Now that we experience in the rescue work often, when spirits come and they say, well, but I have a body, what are you talking about, right? And what they are referring to is really their perispiritual form from their previous lives, most likely. It is in these cases, a suicide, and the situation is very dolorous. He says the body remains connected to the perispirit by all its fibers, and thus all the body's convulsions reverberate in the soul, and it undergoes atrocious suffering. So, suicide, killings, accidents, there is quite a bit of suffering involved because there's no preparation. Actually, the preparatory work is kind of pushed out to the other side. Plus then there's confusion, because most likely the soul doesn't even know about what we're studying, so that becomes very difficult. So, in summary, the state of the spirit at the time of death can be summarized as follows. I'm now on page 227 in Heaven and Hell, the middle of the page. So he tells us now in summary. Just before I go there, I want to see there's a message. Donna. Hi Donna, Maria, Babol, hi. But why don't the spirit guides or guardian angels let them know what has just happened to avoid this confusion? Answer, because our spirit guides remain with us from birth to death. Oh, not answer. Because our spirit guides remain with us from birth to death. It's correct. But, like when this is how my answer. And if anyone else has wants to chime in, please feel free. Because I don't know it all for sure, right? So I would think the reason is when we live our lives, and some of us know we have spirit guides, but do we always communicate with our spirit guides? Are there moments when we completely forget and we don't reach out? So when something like this happens, I would imagine that there is moments, it's a matter of whether the Wi-Fi is connected, right? The Wi-Fi might not be connected. If it is, there is more consciousness. The soul is more morally evolved already. And I would venture to say that at that moment, the spirit guide would be of help. But let me know whether somebody else has a more clearer, better, or more correct answer. So, back to the summary. Hello from Indiana, Sandra. Welcome, welcome. So the slower the disengagement of the perispirit, the more the spirit suffers. We've learned about that, right? The more points of contact, the slower it happens, the more the soul feels pain. The speed of the disengagement depends on the spirit's degree of moral development. We've learned that too. So it depends on us. We have the key. If we work on our moral development, we will aid not only our life on this side, but also our transition and our life after life. So, in other words, we should make every effort to purify ourselves by restraining our evil tendencies and overcoming our passions. So, in our day-to-day life, we should make a constant effort of de-emphasizing matter and making sure that we're not just nourishing our bodies and our material needs of income, pleasure, consumer goods, but that we're also daily focusing on our soul and nourishing our soul. And we have so many different ways, one of which, Kardec Radio, 24/7. 24/7 we can listen, and we have so many podcasts and live classes, so we can really help our inner transformation through nourishing our souls daily through education, and then we practice it. We practice the lessons we learn, right? Because that is where the rubber meets the road. So one thing is that we have that knowledge, but we need to apply it in our lives. So we need to work on our passions. And one other thing that helps us in this process is prayer. Sincere prayer is a form of spiritual magnetization that brings about a more rapid disaggregation of the perispiritual fluid. So that is something we can do in preparation as well. Prayer and meditation. As one of the sages said, prayer is when we talk to God. Meditation is when we listen to the answers. So we can practice the good. Yes, and I want to go to Thought and Life. Some of you guys know the book. It is right here. We have it on Kardec Radio. Vanessa Anzalone did a whole study group on this. very, very highly recommended. And it's on page 43, chapter 10, where in the chapter called Understanding, where Emmanuel teaches us something that perhaps we can make our mantra. I am going to have put it on my mirror and on my fridge so I won't forget. It is a wonderful help, and he teaches us. He says, we must seek goodness, feel goodness, visualize goodness, and mold goodness with all the resources we can muster. So every single moment of the day, and if we use the golden rule and run all of our decisions and thoughts through the golden rule, we have a lot of tools already to help us with our inner transformation. So, just one more time, how can we help ourselves with our transition from this life to life after life? We can do it by working on our own inner transformation. And how does our own inner transformation help us to have a transition that is less painful for the soul, and where we have less confusion or no confusion on during life after life, right after the transition? Again, the key is our inner transformation. And how can we avoid the confusion that often happens already before the transition, but more likely after the transition into the spiritual world? Our inner moral transformation of knowing how this transition happens, and thinking every single day, reminding ourselves that this transition will be happening, so we can hopefully already loosen, maybe that's the wrong word, but we can be aware of our connection that we have, our peri-spiritual connection between our physical form and the soul. Peri-spirit is the link. And that we do by defocusing on our material life. So dear friends, next week we will be looking at our first case. There is different categories of cases. There is, Allan Kardec has it very wonderfully organized. Happy spirits will be our next chapter. We will be looking at happy spirits, of how their lives were and what they're reporting back. Later on, we will look at the average spirits. Later on, after that, the suffering spirits. There's also a category of suicides, and then the repentant criminals, the hardened spirits, and earthly expiations. So there is a lot to learn, and we're looking forward to meeting again next Sunday at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm in California, that's why I'm always starting with Pacific Standard Time. And I want to go back and see whether I overlooked someone. I am sorry, I do not want to do that. I really want to embrace all of you. I'm sometimes not so good at this. Yes, Nora Brazil, does a person's level of evolution determine the way of death? Exactly, of how the process happens. I hope you understood that it is linked, completely linked. So the more we work on our inner transformation, which means we're not only focused on matter, on our material life, that will aid us in our transition process. It will make it easier and will help us hopefully not to even have a state of confusion, or a much shorter state of confusion, depending on how much work we put in. There's Anna from Texas. Hello, Anna, welcome. And then there's Sandra Mosoro. I think I said hi already. And then there's Soul. As we give food for our bodies, we need to give food for our spirit too. Through prayers, good action, working in our own inner transformation, as you said, Sunshine. Exactly. Beautifully summarized. Thank you so much, Soul. Thank you for being here. And then Betsy, this was a wonderful class. I so enjoyed learning. Thank you so much for being here, Betsy. Thank you, and thank you for all of you being here. I'm so grateful, and thank you so much for your excellent explanation, Norba. So thank you. Friends, let us close our eyes for a moment and just open our hearts and minds to God and Jesus, our guide and model. And let us also connect with all the spirit doctors and illuminated spirits who not only were present tonight, but helped to gather this beautiful, important information for us that we are so eternally grateful for. We're also thanking all the spirits who were here apart from us incarnates, who came to learn alongside with us, to learn from this beautiful, important information by Allan Kardec and the good spirits. And we also thank our personal mentors for being by our side and helping us with our inner transformation. We're grateful for having this opportunity of Kardec Radio to come together so that we can study and feel what we're studying, which means we have an opportunity to practice what we are studying. And with this, we are embarking on the new week with renewed effort and strength in focusing on our inner transformation to feel the good, to speak the good, to visualize the good, to see the good in everything, and mold the good with all the resources we have at our hands. And with this, we humbly ask for permission to close tonight's gathering. Thank you, dear friends. Until next week. Take care. Bye-bye.